Hey, thanks for tuning in, lovely listener. Today we are talking about grit, surviving a destructive marriage with Leslie Vernick. Leslie is a clinical social worker with a private practice for 30 years and the author of 7 books, including the enduring bestseller, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship. In this episode, you are going to learn the difference between a disappointing marriage, a difficult marriage, and a destructive marriage. You're going to learn how to empower yourself when you are actually being victimized, how to know when to leave and when to stay and work on your marriage, and the strategy that women have enacted in order to make their abusive partners come to their senses. I do want to add a trigger warning here. There is discussion of domestic violence in this episode. Here's the other thing. Leslie specializes in helping Christian women in destructive marriages. We discuss why the Christian community might need this help specifically, but we also discuss how these kinds of power imbalances can happen in any culture where there's certain people who have a higher status and there's a strong code of conduct to not question those people. So I have seen this play out in business communities where successful people are considered absolutely irreproachable. In the hippie, spiritual, woo-woo community, I dated a guy once who was working on a documentary called Carmageddon, such a great name. And it was about an old yoga guru who was this amazing spiritual teacher, absolutely revered. And he also had a lot of 19-year-old girlfriends. And I certainly saw this stuff playing out in the theater world where young actresses are persuaded by some powerful director to get naked on stage, be more vulnerable, and any hesitation would have been interpreted as a lack of commitment to her craft. My point is, even if you don't come from a Christian background, it's very possible that you are going to have some moments of recognition in hearing Leslie describe the dynamics of an emotionally destructive relationship. Or you might know someone who does. Whether you are Christian or not, a healthy relationship is a healthy relationship. You are going to be fascinated to hear what Leslie has to say about this.
It's time to get your head out of your ass and start creating a life of no regrets. Whether you want to lose weight, get rich, or manifest a hot threesome on the beach, you're going to want to turn this up. This is Goals, Grit, and some woo-woo shit with your host, best-selling author and professional butt kicker, Una Duncan.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It's so good to be with you, Una.
I would love if you could tell our listeners a little bit about what you do.
Well, what I do is I am an online support and educational group. I host one for a large group of women. They're Christian women who are in emotionally destructive and abusive marriages. So it's a very narrow niche, but it's very big that Christian women often have been misunderstood and unheard when they're in abusive marriages. And so I just really felt a need to minister and help them get clear on what the Bible really says and doesn't say, as well as get safe and become whole. And I think that's what we do.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about why you felt that the Christian community specifically needed this kind of help?
Yeah. So there's a couple of beliefs that Christian women or Christians in particular hold to. I'm not so sure that they're as true as they think they are, but they believe them with all their heart. And so it's really hard. And one of them is God hates all divorce. Now that's not really what the Bible says, but it's been taught that way for so long that most women get stuck there because, if God hates all divorce and I'm in an abusive marriage, it'd be better for me just to suffer for Jesus, or it would be better for me, actually, some of the most scariest things I've heard from women, it's just better for me to die, for me to kill myself than for me to get divorced. And so as I began to hear that as a counselor in my practice, which is what I was before, I'm like, whoa, this is wrong. God cares about you. God doesn't want you to be abused, first of all, and he doesn't love marriage more than he loves you. And so I really felt a need to speak to this particular population because they were believing some things that the Bible said that the Bible didn't say. It doesn't say God hates all divorce. It says God hates certain kinds of divorce and not all divorce. And so I think it's really important for me to, or whoever speaks to this population, to use that language, because if I used things that may be in a domestic violence organization, which I fully support, but they wouldn't reach the same ears because of our women's beliefs that they can't get divorced.
Why do you think that that's been taught like that? If the Bible doesn't say that, why do you think that's the prevailing belief, and why is it taught like that?
Really good question. I think there's a couple reasons. One is that passage in particular in Malachi is a pretty hard translation to make, but it was never translated that way until the King James Bible came out in the 1600s. Whether it was a misogynistic kind of intent or whether it was just a mistranslation, it was translated wrong. What it says is, I hate when a man covers himself with violence and treats his wife treacherously, which is exactly what God hates. Not all divorce. In fact, there's other places in the Bible where God allows divorce. So it just doesn't make sense that he would hate all divorce. So I think that that's one reason. And I also think that we have, as Christians, especially conservative Christians, we've elevated the sanctity of marriage. It's important, but it's not more important than the safety and the sanity of the people in the marriage. And I think we've elevated marriage to perhaps a too high of a place, that it's the most important thing to God, and it's not.
So, Leslie, you and I have talked before. I mean, as you know, I probably don't have a huge conservative Christian audience, but I wonder, do you have any observations of how this might play out in other subcultures?
Yeah, I think there are people who want power over others, and they use subversive tactics like manipulation, gaslighting, deflectment, control, and they don't have to use Bible to justify that. They can use other, oppressive kind of language. We see lots of gaslighting in the news. If you watch Fox News, you see one form of gaslighting. If you watch a different form, it's another kind of gaslighting. So I think every organization is tempted. People want power. People want control. In every organization, we see the sexual abuse of women in Hollywood. We see the sexual abuse of children and women in the church. We see sexual abuse of women in organizations. And so the same technique, the same oppression, the same desire for power over and control over, even in the entrepreneurial world, we'll see people who manipulate, gaslight, mislead, promise things that aren't going to be true. And I think it's up to us as people of integrity to educate those under our care to think for themselves, first of all, to not just believe us, even as leaders, that I really want to equip women to think for themselves, not to just transfer their allegiance to one guru to another, but to say, hey, God's given you a good brain. Let's think about it.
Oh, I love that. That's so well put. And tell me, Leslie, what made you start this work? You were already working in counseling and you noticed a big problem?
Yeah, so I was already in counseling. I had been abused as a child. So a lot of my work was working with children who had been abused. And, even in the secular world, I was the beginnings of when the child abuse laws began to be changed in the 70s and all of that. So I worked in a hospital, helped doctors and nurses recognize child abuse. The thing that really struck me, is when I was writing my book on depression and women. And this is what really broke my heart, is when so many women believed that it was better just to die, to commit suicide, or just to die, languish, than to get a divorce. And, I worked in a church. I wasn't employed by a church, but a lot of churches referred to me. And so I was seeing a lot of Christian women, and it was like, holy cow, they would rather die depressed. They would rather die of suicide. And then I took a trip to the Philippines and was teaching there for sexual abuse of children, which is what I was specializing in, teaching the counselors there. And I'll never forget this, a missionary who was from the United States. Her husband was a pastor there, and she came to see me privately, and she said, I just need to tell somebody that I think it's better for me to die than to expose my husband as an abuser. And I thought, wow, what is going on in the minds of these women that make them feel that it's better for them? It's more honorable. And there's this belief, God hates all divorce. There's this belief that it's better to suffer and sacrifice and give my life for the cause. But what they're really doing is enabling evil to continue and allowing their children to believe that this is the right way, and it's not. And so I always tell them, your children need one healthy parent. Even if they don't have a good family, they need one healthy parent in that family. And you're it. So let's look at getting you healthy and strong so that you can decide what to do about your marriage. But you can't decide what to do about your marriage when you're so depressed or you're in such an unhealthy and depleted state. So you and I have the same agreement that it's really important for women to get healthy and strong. We may have different approaches to it, but when you're in a depleted state, you're not thinking correctly. You make some pretty bad choices.
Okay, let me take you back a little bit. I think that one of the first things you do is you help people determine whether they are in a destructive marriage or just a disappointing marriage. Is that the language you use?
I do. So we have three categories. There's a disappointing marriage, which I think everyone goes through. You sort of think that you married Mr. Wonderful, or he thinks he married one of my friends says, I thought I was Barbie and I thought he was Ken and we were going to have our dream house. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, this isn't what it was at all. And so I think there's this time in a marriage where you decide, I'm going to love the person they are, not the person I thought they were. And I think that's true for all of us. But when we get caught up in the disappointment, wow, I thought he was this, or I thought he would do this, or I thought she would be this, we can really get ourselves into a bad place. And so is it a disappointing marriage where you need to learn some ways to grow and ways to improve your marriage, not improve your man, but improve your marriage? Is it a difficult marriage? And I usually define that by a lot of external stressors. You may have a blended family. You may have an autistic child. You may have financial difficulties. You may have jobs that take you out of the country, military, those kind of things. And those are difficulties that can make you stronger or can cause you to respond in immature or ugly ways to each other. But it's not necessarily a destructive marriage in and of itself. It's the situation that brings out the best of you or the worst in you, and you can learn from that. But a destructive marriage is a little bit more insidious in that usually it's a power and control over. It's not just external circumstances. It's one person trying to exercise power over another, eliminating their voice and their choice. And again, in the Christian family, as well as like in the Orthodox Jewish family, or even in Muslim families where it's a very patriarchal culture, usually it's the man who feels like he has the right to objectify and control the woman. And that makes her more vulnerable to being abused.
And so you help them decide what category their marriage is in.
Yeah, we actually have a test on our website. So it kind of helps them to determine, are you in a difficult marriage? Are you in a disappointing marriage? Or are you in a destructive marriage? And then helps you to have some ideas of what to do about that, especially from a faith-based perspective.
And if they determine that they are in a destructive marriage, is the first thing you do help them to get healthy, the person who's being abused?
No, the first thing that we do is help them first validate their feelings, because so often they've been gaslit to think they're too sensitive or they're overreacting or they don't really have grounds to feel the way they feel. So we really want to validate, if they're sure that this is it or they're beginning to put a name to what's happening to them, we want to give them a better vocabulary to describe what's happening. And then we really evaluate safety. So our very first goal is to say, are you safe? And it's not just physically safe. We've never had a woman in our membership be murdered, but we did have one last year that was almost murdered. She's in a coma right now still. So it's just been a real strong goal of ours to make sure that every woman has a safety plan and she understands whether she's in danger of being physically assaulted. Two of our women in our membership over the years, husbands have killed themselves, and they were quite sure had they not had a safety plan, they would have been, part of that dynamic that we read about in the paper all the time. So we really help women decide whether they're physically safe, if they're in danger that way, but also emotionally safe. If you're considering suicide because you're so depressed, you're not safe. And so you can't even get healthy until you get to a safe place where you can start to get healthy. But it also might be other ways, like, are you spiritually safe? Maybe you're being bullied using the Bible and you're being intimidated into compliance because you think they're right and you're wrong. Or maybe you're just not financially safe or sexually safe. Sexually safe and he's, having multiple partners and you feel obligated to stay in this marriage and still provide sexual relations with him, and yet you're putting yourself at risk. Or financial safety. He's going through a lot of the money, he's gambling, he's got addictions, he's using it on porn or other things, and you have no say, or he might be lying to the IRS, all different kinds of ways that women might not be safe. So we really try to help women first kind of define where they're most vulnerable and to create a safety plan.
Hey, dude, if you are enjoying this episode and you have a friend that you think might also benefit from this information, please share it with them. That helps my podcast so much, and it's going to help your friend. Share the love. Thanks so much. Wow. As someone who also leads groups, not at all in the extent that you do, that feels like a heavy responsibility. Do they share that with the group? And then do you help facilitate? Do you work with law enforcement?
No, we don't work with law enforcement. That's their responsibility. So what we do is, so they join our membership and they have a journey. And the first step is awakening, kind of becoming aware. And then the second step is safety. We have videos that they watch to develop a safety plan. And then we do Zoom calls with the group and say, do you have any questions? How can we help you? And then we refer them to their local law enforcement or financial planners or other places where they may need to get some more information for their own particular situation.
And of course, they're doing this all in secret.
Yeah, they're doing this in secret. And we encourage them to meet with one another so that we do a lot of support in our group so that they meet other people in their local area. If they can find women that have joined our group that are locally, every time I travel, I usually say, hey, I'm going to be in, Raleigh, North Carolina. Anybody from my membership will meet you for dinner, and we go here so that they can meet one another, because having boots on the ground of other people who know what their life is like, that they can trust and feel safe with, is really important for this population.
Mm-hmm. So if someone has determined they're in a destructive marriage and they have come up with their safety plan and they have also decided that they don't want to leave, which I assume some of your people do feel that way, what do you do? I mean, do you coach them on how to fix their marriage or fix their partner? What happens then?
Yeah, I think they've already tried to fix their partner for a long time, and that's not working. Certainly, we do, as people, try to encourage each other. My husband and I have been married for a long time, and he's made me a better person. I've made him a better person by the feedback we've given each other. We can't control each other, but we do say, maybe this isn't your best self, and that helps us. But when a woman's tried that over and over again and said, stop, ouch, I don't like that, this hurts me, this is damaging to me, and someone doesn't really care, you can't change them. The only person you can change is you. And so a magic question that we ask our women, because they say to themselves, if only he would change, if only he would stop cheating, if only he would start telling me the truth, if only he would stop lying, if only he would stop drinking, whatever it is that he's doing that's causing the harm. And he's not stopping. So the question becomes, what's my problem with his problem? I don't like living this way. It's harming our children. I'm scared. Our money's going out the window. So now that gives you some tools to say, all right, what am I going to do about my problem? I can't fix his problem, but I have a problem. And my problem is I'm scared. I don't know how to set boundaries. And so we can help them to start learning how they can deal with their side of the street. But I will say a lot of women don't want to leave at first. And I'm not suggesting that they leave. They have to make that decision for themselves. But you cannot stay in a relationship long term if you don't feel safe. And so that's one of the first things that we evaluate. If you're safe, if they're not feeling like they're just miserable, but they're not being actively harmed, well, then how do you stay well? Because sometimes they're in a miserable marriage because he's just checked out. He's not actively abusing them unless they want something from him. As long as they don't ask him for anything and leave him completely alone, he's happy to just do his own thing and, not bother her. Mm-hmm. So if she has littles, or she decides, I'm too old to separate, or I don't have means to support myself right now, she may choose to figure out how to stay in a house with someone without a relationship. Because you don't really have a relationship. You just are like roommates. And how does she come to accept that? And that's a hard thing for some women.
Well, that's interesting, because I thought that you had to, in order to appeal to your audience, be kind of divorce neutral. But you're saying I'm not neutral. If you're unsafe, you must leave. Is that true?
I'm not saying what they should do at all, because a woman who's been in an abusive relationship has been controlled by way too many people in her life. So what I'm helping her to see is, what are your safe options? What are your wise options? What are healthy options? Let's look at those. But ultimately, it's your choice. You decide how you want to live your life. And empowering her to make that choice and encouraging her to make that is part of her growth. If she just goes from a malevolent controller to a benevolent controller, she's still not doing her own work to heal.
I really appreciate what you just brought up, because I was looking at the synopsis of your book on Amazon, and I mean, my gosh, your book is still, I don't know how old it is, but I'm talking about the emotionally destructive marriage, and it's still number 2 as far as Christian marriage books. Is that the right category?
It's usually pastoral counseling or Christian counseling.
So part 2 is called Change Begins With You. And you open the chapter by saying the ways that you might unknowingly be enabling the destruction in your marriage to continue. And I love that, because change begins with you is so empowering. But how do we walk the line between being empowering and victim blaming?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And so you can't change him. You can only change you. But if we use the analogy of a dance, let's say you're dancing with someone and you don't like how they're dancing with you. They're stepping on your toes. They're knocking into your legs. They're hurting you. And you say, ouch, and stop, and don't, and please don't do it that way. And they don't. They blame you. It's your fault I dance this way. They, tell you you're a rotten dancer. They tell you that they're not going to change. Well, what do you do? What's your problem with their problem? They can't dance. They don't want to hear from you about how to change your dance steps. So what's your problem? You're getting hurt. So what you do is you stop dancing. You stop dancing that way. You say, hey, I'm willing to dance with you this way. Like I'm not willing to hold on to you. I'm not willing to slow dance with you. So we help them to change their dance steps, because a destructive person can't engage with you if you keep engaging. And so we want to help them learn how to detach from that so that they're not caught in the same destructive dance. Because when you're a repeat victim of the same pattern over and over again, it's not victim blaming. It's not saying it's your fault he's doing that, but you have to ask yourself, what's my part in enabling this to happen to me over and over again? Right? I know it's going to happen. Why am I allowing that to happen? Why aren't I distancing myself? Why aren't I getting safe? Why aren't I having good boundaries? And so those are the things that our women can learn from a horrible situation. Who wants to be in this kind of situation? And yet sometimes what they need to learn is, I have a no and I'm going to use it. I need to set boundaries and I have them and I know what they are. And there's consequences when you violate those boundaries, when maybe she's never done that before.
Are your people ever really resistant to that idea that they have more agency than maybe they had thought? This podcast is made possible by Fit Feels Good, my online fitness and nutrition company. Here's what we do.
I have so many incredible benefits from the MFA program. It literally changed my life. I have the book, Healthy AF. I'm absolutely in love with my life now. I find that the healthy habits that I built are amazing to go back to. The benefits that you're going to see as a woman in your 40s plus are things you could have never imagined. The key, which I know Una talks about over and over again, is loving your body now, not what you're envisioning it to be.
Yeah, I think they do sometimes, because where they get caught in, let me tell a story that I tell. This is a funny story. You'll like this. So we tell the story about how you can change the end of the story, even if you don't like the story. And we talk about running out of toilet paper. So you're running out of toilet paper. You've got terrible diarrhea. You're sitting on the toilet and you're like, this isn't fair. Why is this happening to me? No one's home. No one's here to help me. And so you have a choice of how you're going to handle your problem. It's not your fault you have a problem. You have food poisoning. You have flu. It's not your fault that you ran out of toilet paper. It happens. But it is your problem. You have a dirty bottom. So what are you going to do about your problem? Are you just going to sit on the pot and be angry that no one's here to help you, or that you ran out of toilet paper, or you got food poisoning and it's not your fault? Or are you going to solve your problem? Even if you don't like all the options, like you have to use a towel, or you have to take a shower. And so what we help our women understand is, even when you don't like all the answers, you have some agency. Once you decide, I'm going to hop in the shower, you actually move forward in your story. When you get stuck on the pot and just complain that this isn't fair, and why should I have to do this? It's his fault, or it's somebody else's fault that I got food poisoning. It's true. It's not your fault. Just like if you got hit by a drunk driver, it's not your fault. You're in the hospital in intensive care. But if you want to learn to use your legs again, you're the one who has to do the exercises, right?
I really did like that analogy, so thank you very much. And it reminds me of, I heard a great definition of learning. Learning is making a different decision in the same circumstances. And so it's like deciding that I'm the one that has a choice here. That's when you move forward. So I really like that.
That's right. Once you stop asking the question why, and you move to the question what am I going to do about my problem? I don't like living this way. I don't like feeling so trapped. I don't want to feel suicidal anymore. I don't want to be abused in my marriage. Okay, now what do I need to do? Those are the places where you start getting movement. It's not your fault that it's happening to you, but it is your responsibility to get out of there or to get yourself safe.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned consequences, and I want to ask you about that. I have a note here in chapter 10. You say, we'll give you a plan on how to calmly confront your husband, together with examples of specific consequences you can implement if he refuses to listen. I would love to hear, what are some consequences? What kind of power would someone maybe have in this situation?
So I'll give you a simple one, because this happens a lot. So maybe your husband does a lot of road raging and it terrifies you. When he gets upset, not even with you, he's upset with the other driver, and he blames the driver for his crazy driving. Well, he gave me the finger. He's tailgating me. I'm going to, speed off and drive crazy. And all the kids in the back are screaming, Mom, we're going to die. And you feel terrified. So a boundary would be, first you say, slow down, don't do this. Of course, they don't listen to you. So then you decide, hey, my boundary is I'm not willing to drive in the car with you anymore, and unless you let me drive. So I'll drive in the car with you if I'm in control of the car. If you want to drive, I'm not going with you. I'm going to drive separately. I'm going to call an Uber. I'm not driving home. Or someone's drank too much at a party, and you say, give me the keys to the car. I'm going to drive home, and they won't. Well, you can say, okay, I can't control you. I can only control me. I'm calling Uber. Or I'm not going home with you. So that may cause some more friction for sure. Mm-hmm. And that's where you have to determine whether you're safe to go home that night. But I would rather you do that than get in a car accident on the way home because you didn't have a boundary. And so helping a woman establish a boundary of what she will do, what she won't do, and what the consequences are if he dishonors her boundary. Hey, I won't continue to have this conversation when you scream at me. I'm going to go in my room. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go to the bathroom. Whatever you have to say to get out of there, you don't have to stay and let yourself be victimized continuously.
Okay, we have a big giveaway this month for the person who leaves the best review for this podcast. As you probably know, reviews are huge in order to help a new podcast like this one grow an audience. So, if you're kind enough to leave a review, you will be eligible to win a free spot in my upcoming 28-day transformation program. This is my signature fitness program that has 97% of past participants saying it changed their life. All you got to do is leave an awesome review right now and tune in next month for when I announce the winner. Back to the show. And so when I hear all these examples, I get worried for this person because I'm like, oh, he's just going to chase her into the bedroom, or he's just going to get mad at her when she gets home after she takes an Uber. But what you're saying is, even if it does escalate the tension or the violence, then she should hold those boundaries and have a safety plan. Do I have that right?
Well, what I would say is if she knows that's going to happen, then she has already done her safety planning before that. So that's the first thing is, hey, when I start having boundaries, when I have a voice, when I have a no, what happens? And if she already knows that it escalates into danger, then she can't really stay well. She can't, right? She just can't. So some women find that when they do that, their husband's mad at them, but it's not going to escalate into more physical danger. He might not talk to them for a week or whatever, but they've come to understand, I can handle that more than I can handle a crazy drive home.
I got it.
So you have to know your husband and you have to know what might happen. But in 40 years of counseling couples in destructive marriages, I have never, ever had a man come to his senses because a woman has over-accommodated him. Never. But I have had a number of men come to me, not a great deal, but a number of men who have come to me and said, thank you for teaching my wife not to put up with my crap anymore. Because when I knew she would leave me, because see, if they believe the same thing, oh, God hates divorce, she'll never leave me, he has absolutely no incentive to change. Right? But when she finally gets strong enough to say, I won't live like this. I love you, but I will not put up with this anymore the way you treat me. If you want to continue watching porn, that's your choice. If you want to continue cheating or lying, whatever he's doing, screaming at the kids, I can't change you. I can only change me, but this is too destructive to me and my mental health to stay. And she moves on to get her own apartment or whatever she does. That has sometimes, not often, but I would say maybe 15%. So not like 85%, but 15% that it helps a man say, wow, like, oh my gosh, I never thought she'd leave. Now the stakes are much higher. If I don't begin to pay attention and change myself, I'm going to lose her. And that can begin to make a change. And like I said, I've had men, total strangers, either call me or I was at a bookstore one time, and a man came up to me and he goes, "Are you Leslie Vernick?" I had my workout clothes on and my baseball cap on. I said,
"That's my girl."
It depends who's asking, because I'm always nervous who I'm going to run into. And he said, "I just want to tell you, I saw my wife reading your book and it got nervous because I thought, oh, am I destructive? And I got your book and I read it myself and I thought, oh my gosh, I am destructive." And I never heard it from her. I never could listen to her. I just always dismissed what she had to say. But as I read your words, I realized I was, and I got into therapy and we're doing better. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I was going to ask you about that because, we met in entrepreneurial groups and in marketing, they always say, you have to, what you're selling is a transformation. And in my case, it's so clear and visual. Here's the point A and here's point B, and I'll help you get to point B. What is the point A and B that you sell people? I mean, what is the transformation, the ta-da at the end? Because I'm assuming, do a lot of your clients hope that it's going to be the guy changing and their marriage getting fixed?
I think by the time they get to my end, they're usually have done all of they've been to 15 different counselors. They've done all the things that everybody's told them to do and it hasn't worked. So the transformation that we're promising them is that they will get safe. They will get sane or clear on what does the Bible really say about this, and they will get stronger because their children need one healthy parent. So it's not about promising the transformation of her husband. We can't promise that. What we can say is you will come to know a brand new part of you that you like very much. The part of you that you don't like is the part of you that you're allowing, because not only do you not matter to him, you don't matter to yourself. You don't matter to yourself if you're not sticking up for yourself in a good way, right? That God calls us to stick up for ourselves. He calls us to take care of our one precious life. And if we're not taking care of it, then it means that we don't matter to ourselves. And so really helping a woman understand that God loves her and that she's to matter, not in a narcissistic, selfish way, but she's to matter enough to herself that she doesn't let herself be abused and mistreated.
Do you have any other success stories to share?
Yeah, so we have some of those, but I think probably one of my favorite success stories is a woman who was married to a pastor who was very sexually abusive to her and very demanding, entitled. God says you can't say no. That's another verse that they misuse. Your body is my body, kind of thing. And she was paralyzed I can't remember exactly how she was paralyzed, but she was pregnant and was paralyzed from a blood clot or something that happened in her spine. So she's in a wheelchair. So of any woman that couldn't take care of herself and get out of there, it's a woman in a wheelchair who's got 5 kids married to a pastor. And she was on our podcast and she shared her story and she just said, I feel stronger and healthier more than ever. And I'm out of that and I'm not getting sexually abused anymore. And I'm not getting mentally abused. And I've got a job and I have a life and I'm really thriving. And it was just, you would think a woman who is in a wheelchair, married to a pastor with 5 kids could never get out. And she got out and she's safe and she's happy. And all of her kids see what was going on with her husband. He's, proven his colors are his colors. And she's just alive in a way that she never was before. And so that would be one of our success stories, is that she's healthy and strong, even from her wheelchair.
Oh, that's a great story. Speaking of the pastor, I know that you do a lot of work educating church leaders about this. Do you get any resistance from church leaders about your work?
I do. I get less than I used to. In fact, I was just at a conference in September at the American Association of Christian Counselors conference, where there was about 7,000 to 8,000 people there from all over the world. And that was the first time I have gotten so many people stop me and say, thank you for what you're doing. But I've been doing this for a long time. And a lot of times I get stopped and say, why are you ruining marriages? You're breaking families apart. And that would be the last thing I would want to ever be accused of. But that is what I'm accused of sometimes. And it's not my desire to break anybody apart. My desire is for people to get healthy and strong and have a true relationship with God, not a relationship in which I'm your God and I'm going to tell you what to do. And that's what those unhealthy marriages and oppressive marriages are about, that a woman actually has to have her husband as her God. And it's just so wrong and unhealthy for both of them.
When you teach the other church leaders, are you teaching them on how to update the narrative or to have more empathy for these women or to recognize it? What's your primary objective in teaching them?
So it depends on how long they give me to teach. So I'm having an opportunity to teach in the Ukraine in 2 weeks. I'll be teaching the church leaders in the Ukraine, which is a wonderful opportunity. But it depends on what they want to know, because what you want to know, you're more likely to listen to. But if I have a day or two to really work with them, I'll teach them how to recognize, like, how do you understand when a couple sitting before you, is this just two people who are arguing with each other? Or is there more of a power control dynamic that we need to look at? And how do you find it? How do you assess for it? What are the patterns that you look for? What are the questions you ask? So that would be one. And then let's say he says he's really sorry and he's not going to do it again. I'm going to really change. How do you know? How can you tell? What are the things that you need to look for so that she doesn't keep spinning her wheels with the same story, same song, different verse over and over again for 25 years. So that would be something. Also, how to help her get healthy, how to help him get healthy if they want that. Oftentimes the abuser doesn't. He just moves on to another person. But for the woman who's left in the dust, it's really important for her not to just say, well, I got rid of him and now I need to find another person to rescue me, but really helping her be strong and healthy so she doesn't need someone to take care of her. She can take care of herself. And if she ever finds someone she wants to partner with, she does it from enough different place than from unhealthiness.
I know that you also teach people what a healthy marriage looks like. Is there tell us a little bit about the primary tenets of a healthy marriage and what might surprise some people and maybe particularly your clients?
Yeah. So I think a healthy marriage consists of three things: mutuality, that there's mutual honesty, mutual caring, mutual respect, mutual acknowledgement of shortcomings. It's not one person's the right one and one person's the wrong one. One person does the giving, the other person does the taking. But there's a mutual giving to the relationship, including the mutuality of the repairs and maintenance. If you've been married any length of time, all marriages, all relationships take some repairs and maintenance work to stay alive. Just like your house requires maintenance and repairs to stay in a good shape. So that's mutuality. And then reciprocity means that power and responsibility are shared. It's not that one person has the power over the other, but they both have decision-making power. They both have a no, they both have a voice. And then the last is freedom to be yourself. I think one of the things that I find a lot of women are feeling like they have to fit a mold of what he wants, or, you have to look a certain way. You have to act a certain way. You have to have a certain sex drive. You have to have a certain weight. All of these kind of things that make you feel oppressed, that you can't be who you are, but you have to be what he wants, or vice versa. But usually it's the woman who feels that. And so the freedom to be who you are and learn to be the best version of yourself and express your no. And if you don't have the freedom to have your no, that's one of the signs that we give a woman is, let's say he's sorry and I'm coming back and I'll do everything you want and I want to come home. And she says, no, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for you to come home. How does he handle her no? Because oftentimes that's a red flag. Oh, you're being so selfish. You don't know the harm you're causing. Well, now he's going back to the abusive strategies, right? So his nice persona was just more of a manipulative strategy to get home, right? Because if he can't accept her no, there's no sign of a healthy marriage yet, because she's not allowed to be her and say, I'm not ready yet. You have to do what I want because I'm more important than you. And then it goes back to that same old pattern.
Right. That makes sense. As you know, I'm not an expert on Christian theology at all, but I understand that there's general themes of redemption and forgiveness. Do you think that part of what makes your approach unique and appealing to your audience is because you do allow some space for the possibility that the abuser can redeem himself?
Versus just demonizing him as, just get rid of the guy, he's a jerk. I think that redemption is a wonderful story for all of us. The problem that our women make is they say, well, God wants him to change. God wants him to change. So why won't God change him? And I say, well, God is a respecter of our free will, right? We all have a free will and God never changes anybody who doesn't want to change. Right? He never changes anybody who doesn't want to change. And so you can pray up the wazoo for him, but if he doesn't want to change, God's not coming in and changing him. And so to really understand what redemption looks like, redemption comes from a person who's saying, I'm sick of myself the way I am. And I want to change. Just like your people, they have to come to a place. I mean, if a husband signs his wife up for exercise and she doesn't really want to do it, it's not going to work for her,
No,
right?
it's not going to work at all.
No matter how much you help her, she doesn't want it.
Oh, yeah.
And so same with the change for a man. If he doesn't really want that change, he's not going to do the hard work to change. He has to want it.
How common Is it for people to think that if God didn't want me in this marriage, then he wouldn't have put me there, or that there's something God's trying to teach me, or that this is, divine providence that I'm in this marriage and therefore I shouldn't mess with it?
Well, a lot of women think that, but this is really funny because somebody asked me what I did and she goes, I was married to a narcissist. She goes, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I said, really? I said, tell me, she wasn't Christian or anything like that. I said, tell me more. She said, when I got married, I was such a naive, innocent, people-pleasing girl. I had to learn strong. I had to learn brave. I had to learn boundaries real fast or he would have eaten me alive. My marriage didn't survive, but I grew strong. And that's the viewpoint. Like, yeah, God may have put you with this person, not for any long-term marriage, but because you need to learn how to get stronger. You need to learn some better boundaries. You need to learn who you really are. And sometimes those are hard lessons. Like, why does God allow someone to get cancer? Why does God allow someone to get hurt? Not because he doesn't care. He does care, but there's a part of a bigger story. Like, why did God allow me to have the mother I had? He allows us to be in stories to bring us to a place where that story is part of the redemption story of how we got strong enough to help the other person behind us. And so, yes, but not because he just wants me to suffer and I need to stay here and suffer to keep my marriage alive.
And is that how you think of it, Leslie, when you said, why did God give me the mother that I had? Do you think it's so that I could do this work?
I had an abusive, mentally unstable mom who had an abusive, mentally unstable mom. It just goes from generation to generation. And she was, abusive enough that my father, when she divorced him, he didn't have custody. Back then, 50 years ago, dads never got custody, and he got full custody of all of his children because of my mom's behavior. So, yeah, I think that it made me very sensitive to how kids need one healthy parent. Even if they don't have a happy family, they need one healthy parent who can teach them not to repeat the patterns. So I wasn't the kind of mother that my mother was. It went through generations, and studies are now showing in epigenetics and all of that our trauma is passed down generationally, that the body keeps the score, that all of that if we're not recognizing the environment we're in, and God tells us in the Bible that your environment matters to you, and the words that are spoken over you matter. Just life and death is in the power of the tongue. The Bible says that. So if someone's speaking negative words over you your whole life, it impacts your physiology, it impacts your psychology, it impacts your spirituality, and you cannot thrive and grow in that kind of environment.
Do you have any final words for anybody who's listening to this who might be in a destructive relationship with a power imbalance of any kind?
Yeah, I would just say to them that you matter. And you might not matter like I didn't matter to my mother, not because of who I was. This is a funny story, but my client, she had a big diamond ring, like a 2-carat diamond ring. And she was so mad at her husband, she pulled off her ring and she threw it down the toilet and flushed it. And then she said, how dumb was that? I could have pawned the ring and used it for rent. But so her throwing the ring down the toilet did not make the ring not valuable. The ring was valuable. The ring was valuable. So your husband not treating you well, my mother not treating me well, it didn't define me. It felt like it defined me, but it doesn't define me. Just because someone treats you bad. People treated Jesus bad, for goodness sake, and he was perfect. All right. So just because someone treats you bad doesn't define you. It's not who you are. The person who has to matter to you most is you, so that you begin to realize that you were given a gift, and that is your one precious life. And how are you going to live it? And are you going to live it in terror of another human being? Or are you going to live it to its fullest potential? And that's totally up to you.
Thank you for that. Where can people, I know you have a podcast. Tell us about the best places where people can get more from you.
So people can take that test, whether you're in a difficult relationship, on my website, which is leslievernick.com. It's with a V, Vernick. And you can just press the button, take the quick start guide, and it'll take you through that. We have a podcast called Relationship Truth Unfiltered, really helping people understand what healthy relationships look like. And we are from a Christian perspective, but I think healthy is healthy. Even though we use Bible verses to support that, I'm using those Bible verses to help Christians understand that God is the one who created you. He knows what healthy looks like in your body, in your mind, in your soul, in your spirit. And so get healthy because that's God's will for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, Leslie.
It's so good to see you, Una.
Hey, I'd be so interested to hear what you thought of that interview with Leslie. I think one of my favorite parts was her respect for the women that she counsels. And when she said, even as a leader, I want to equip women to think for themselves and not just transfer their allegiance from one guru to another. I thought that part was so cool. And as always, I want to know what you think is most interesting. And if you know of anyone who could use Leslie's help, of course, all of her links are in the show notes. Until next week. Hey dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.